Hi guys, it's Charles here. Welcome back to this voice leading series. I had lots of very kind comments on the first two videos asking me to continue this series. I was slightly hesitant to do it because I hadn't quite got the point across in the first two videos, I don't think. So in this video, I'm going to address some of the questions and queries I had in the first two, and I'm tying in the generic modality compression videos here as well for reasons I'll explain in a moment. So in the first two videos, a really important point I hadn't got across correctly was that those two videos weren't actually for guitarists. Now I know my channel is primarily guitar related, but really that was for theory students, music theory students. Some of the questions I received from guitarists, the confusion stems from that. I hadn't clarified that. In this video, we're going to look at how to actually apply voice leading to the instrument. And really what I'm going to conclude is that although voice leading is a theoretical concept that you should understand, as a player, really, it's only something which is for practice and for composition. When you are in a live improvisation setting, we probably have better things to spend our brain power on than worrying about true voice leading. So I'm going to show you a few examples in this video of how maybe a more visual approach to the guitar rather than worrying too much about the pen and paper approach as we covered in the first two videos. So in this comment, I was asked essentially to give a practical example and what the point of voice leading is. Now it's great to see that the commenter here has understood the theory, because as you know, it is very important. Just because we're guitarists, we don't suddenly not have any relevance or use for the theory. We do need to understand the theory, but we then need to figure out how it applies to our instrument. So here's a really clear example. Let's take an E chord. Remember, I've got a 7-string closest to my face here, but the rest of my guitar is normal. If I play E, D and C, now that was an E chord, a D chord, and a C chord. But you probably thought, what a strange way to play it. If you've ever done this before, E, D, C, you are voice leading. All voice leading really means is choosing a smoother journey through the chords. So we compare this to this. And it sounds smoother. What's the point? Well, like I say, really this is mainly for composition and something to work on in your practice, but it gives a more sophisticated, smoother sound, which is probably more suitable for jazz music and of course classical music. So the two big names for guitarists in voice leading are Bach. He didn't invent voice leading, but he really streamlined voice leading and he really made it an essential component of his music compared to his contemporaries. The other important musician for guitarists is a chap called Mick Goodrick. Now, Mick Goodrick is the generic modality compression guy who wrote the book with Tim Miller. Mick literally wrote the book on voice leading. He has a series of books called the Almanac of Guitar Voice Leading. You can use these as a study tool. They're very difficult to track down nowadays. I don't think they're in print anymore, but perhaps you can buy a PDF somewhere. So voice leading is perhaps at first mentally more challenging, but physically less demanding, because the chord you're going to is always going to be near the chord you're currently playing. It's also worth saying at this point that voice leading is a really high yield skill to practice. Voice leading ties into chords and scales. Although we teach chords and scales as if they are two separate topics, remember that chords and scales are really one and the same. Allan Holdsworth described this as a chord just being members of a 7-person family standing up. Say you have 3 of them stand up, you'd still recognise, oh, they're from the Harrison family. If the other 4 stand up, you'd still recognise they're from the Harrison family. So chords are representatives of a scale. And it's really important to bear that in mind when we are studying chords, because it can seem like the boring part of guitar playing, like rhythm guitar, but actually it's the most high yield skill available to us as guitarists is working on our voice leading and working on our chord playing, because it becomes a visual tool across the neck, which you can use as a rhythm playing device, but also a solo playing device. So you can use it as a skeleton, a framework upon which to apply your scales, your licks, and practice things moving through different keys. It's such a hugely important thing that you work on in your practice. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say we had a 2-5-1 in the key of D. So I could play that here. I can use those same shapes to visualize a melody. So I could have something like this. So there I'm using the notes of the chord to build a melody around. And just seeing them like that, I'm not being too strict here, I'm just improvising, but I'm staying in that rough ballpark and using those notes almost as a safety blanket. And I know as long as I land on one of those notes of those chords, as they pass by, it's always going to sound acceptable. Now this next comment is a question relating to the theory. This chap here, James, has obviously really understood the theory and tried to apply it to the instrument, but found occasionally it doesn't work, or perhaps quite often it doesn't work. Now this refers back to what I said at the beginning of the video. We need to understand the limitations of our instrument. Now the guitar is a brilliant instrument, but compared to the piano, we have only 6 or 7 strings that we can play. And things like tones and semitones, playing more than 1 or 2 tones or semitones in a single chord is really a very challenging thing to do. Once you've understood the theory, you need to make it a bit more guitar-y. And the way to do that is to simply use the approach all guitarists use, which is visualization. Looking at your chords and trying to find smoother movements through them. Now, it's perhaps a good idea to stick with the theory on the page, but start with a voicing on the guitar that you know really well. Maybe a B minor 7 chord like this, where you play all the 7s on the bottom 4 strings. Let's say we're going for another 2-5-1. So we've got B, E7, A. Well, that would look like this. So rather than worrying too much about the theory of it, I'm simply choosing the closest voicing that I know. So B minor 7 there. Well, I've got 2 notes in common with this voicing of an E7. 6, 7, 5, 7 on the bottom 4 strings. 6, 6, 5, 5 for my A. So use your guitar voicings as your starting point, and that might help you, James. Another thing to be aware of in terms of limitations of voice leading is voice leading often travels you in one direction. So if I take that same 2-5-1, and then from here I continue the voice leading. And again continue the voice leading. Okay, I've had to break the voice leading there because I've run out of instrument in this direction. So a sensible thing to do is at the end of a section, reset. So let's say I had to play a 2-5-1 over and over again. I'd maybe just do 2. Find 2 that I like the sound of. And at this point I can reset. so on and so forth. So another thing to say about the limitations of the instrument, and this is where we kind of tie in the generic modality compression approach by Mick Goodrick. Someone called Barry Harris, which I'm sure if you're watching this video, you'll know who Barry Harris is. If you've managed to find my videos on YouTube, you've definitely managed to find his.
All over the world, there are people, and I mean this is at every school I've been to, and believe me, I've been to most of them. North Texas, Tate, Berkeley, I can't stand those schools. Boston Conservatory, McGill in Montreal, Concordia in Montreal. I've been to all the schools. I go to a school in Spain. I go to a school in different countries. And believe me, every piano player is playing these big chords. That's supposed to make you know that you're supposed to be playing small chords. This school should be dedicated to small chords. There should be nobody here who plays one-note melodies with this right hand. Your chords are supposed to be blended in together. You know, really where I learned about it, I tell you, I was teaching a class and it's a lady, almost as old as me. She played a song one day and then I suddenly saw this is the way we're supposed to do it. It's a blend of the hands together. Chords with both hands, you know. Art Tatum did not play that left hand up that high all the time. He did not do it. Bud Powell didn't do it. Monk didn't do it. Dave Brubeck didn't do it. A lot of people didn't do it. Al Haig didn't do it. If all of those people didn't do it, then we aren't supposed to do it. The only person that I know that did it was Earl Garner, Red Garland. Now, why should that be the rule of the world today? I don't know. Every piano player, and it's not right. You people are supposed to know. These little small, I'm just playing some little old small stuff. You're supposed to rip this off. If you know all those big chords, you're supposed to, all the small chords are in your hand already. Now, why can't you just rip this stuff off? You can't. You don't even know the little things. So we have to learn the little things.
He talks about how we should all play smaller chords. Now, the point of playing smaller chords as a guitarist, the benefit, I should say, if you don't worry about playing the root because you assume the bassist's playing it or the left hand of the piano is playing it or the function of the harmony implies the bass note to the listener, if we just think about triads instead, that's going to be a lot easier on the guitar than worrying about 4-note chords. So when we're playing on the guitar, just pick the most flavoursome notes, like I talked about in my modal harmony video, and just reduce the number of notes. So the next question refers to what happens if you have a 4-note chord and then the next note is a 5-note chord. Now, of course, if we take voice leading literally, which is a choral writing, 4-part choral writing, well, if you needed a 4-note chord for most of the piece and then suddenly you needed a 5-note chord, you would need an extra singer. Obviously, that would be impractical. That's not really the way that we would write. But in jazz playing, we do often have more extensions, fewer extensions, a triad followed by a 5 or 6 note chord. So all you do, as we talked about in our modal harmony video, is you choose however many notes of the chord you want to play, choosing probably the most flavoursome ones. Or you might choose the most easy to voice lead. You don't need to represent every single note in a chord. So let's say I wanted to play a 2-5-1 where every single chord was extended. So I might have a B minor 9 and I would just play 4 notes. Now I'm adding the bass note to give you context there, but I can just play 4 notes and then maybe an E9 and then maybe A major 9. So I'm only picking 3-4 note voicings because we're limited to 6 strings on the instrument anyway. So just pick the ones that you like the sound of. You don't need to be completely strict to the, let's say a 13 chord doesn't have to have the 11 and the 9 and the 7 and the 5 and the 3 and the root in. That's impossible on the guitar unless you've got a 7 string like this, in which case it's still pretty much impossible. I can't even get my head around where to start with that. So Make your chords smaller. Make Barry Harris happy. So this next question is about generic modality compression on Stella By Starlight. This is just one example of lots of questions I've received on my harmonic analysis videos. It's really important to understand, first of all, I'm not going to do generic modality compression on Stella By Starlight because that is the Creative Chordal Harmony book. The whole book is just Stella By Starlight, so I can't think of anything I could say that isn't already in that book. It's about £10 to buy that book. I can possibly put an Amazon link below if you want to track it down, and just study the book. It's absolutely brilliant. However, there's a bit of a problem with this type of question, which is it's too specific. We need to understand that tunes are built from harmonic progressions. If you are stuck by one particular chord in any standard, then you've probably got a broader lack of clarity in your understanding of standards. So all standards are constructed from the same harmonic material. So I did a harmonic analysis of Stella By Starlight, How High the Moon, Someday My Prince Will Come, Mr. PC, Mr. Sims, The Thrill Is Gone. I've done all these tunes, but they're all the same. Now, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that in that is the biggest compliment, because if a tune can be built from pretty much the same material but is completely unique, that shows the genius of the songwriter. However, as a student, we just need to make sure that we are definitely comfortable with those basic building blocks before we worry about a specific single chord in a tune. So let's look at some of the most important building blocks. So in a tune like Autumn Leaves, we've got a 2-5-1, which is of course the essential building block of music. But we continue through the cycle. They do, in Autumn Leaves, we do add a dominant chord in there, which isn't theoretically correct, but I'm just going to give that one a miss for today. But we need a 2-5-1, 4-7-3-6, okay? Which is how to get from a 2 chord to the relative minor. We'll do it in G minor. So I'd have my 2-5-1 in B flat major. And now I'll do it again with the dominant chord, so it's actually Autumn Leaves. I'll do it up here. So that was voice leading. Every chord was the closest possibility. Now, you may have noticed that I almost ran out of neck. I was starting to worry there, thinking, oh, where's my next chord? Well, I just go down a string set on the guitar, of course, but it looks like a big move. But in terms of the actual notes of the chord, it's the next closest. Now, similar to Autumn Leaves is the turnaround. Now, the turnaround, we're going to extend it all the way to begin on the 4th chord for now. And we're going to go 4-7-3-6-2-5-1 because that works really nicely. So let's go in the key of C so I don't have to think too hard. If I'm in the key of C, my 4 chord would be an F. So if I start here, and I'm going to voice lead through starting on F. So you need to be able to do that. It's a very important movement. Now, of course, you need to be able to do a minor 2-5-1 as well. Now, by all means, extend that up to a 4-7-3-6-2-5-1 in a minor key. That would be a brilliant exercise. But a minor 2-5-1, you will see a lot. So in the key of D minor, that would be E minor 7. So that was E minor 7 flat 5, I should have said. A7, D minor 7. However, we know that really we want a flat 9 sound in our 7 chord. Now the problem there is a flat 9 is going to add a 5th note. So I'm just going to not play the root, and that gives me the diminished chord. So I'm going to play E minor 7, E diminished, D minor. Now it's really technically a C sharp diminished if we think of it that way, but really it's an A7 flat 9. So I've got E minor 7, A7 flat 9 played looking like an E diminished, D minor 7. And I could do that up here. E minor 7, flat 5. Sorry, I keep forgetting to say flat 5. Okay, so I'm just going through all the different inversions. One more up here. Now another important harmonic device that's used a lot is what I call minorization. Now all minorization means to me is whatever the chord should be, or whatever it is. Of course, we don't always need to play a chord, for example, a 2-5-1, we don't always get the 1. But whatever the chord was going to be, or whatever it was, we then reduce it by 1 degree. So whatever chord type it was becomes one smaller chord type. So if it was major, it would become minor. If it was minor, it would become minor 7 flat 5. If it was minor 7 flat 5, it would become diminished. It just becomes smaller, whatever it was. So we use this quite a lot, and Stella By Starlight's a good example of this. So our first chord is a 2-5. Our first harmonic progression, I should say, is a 2-5. So we've got ba 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 da da. Then we go to C minor, F7. And then that F7 becomes an F minor 7. Now in doing that, in minorizing a dominant chord, it becomes a new 2 normally. So this gives us a string of 2-5-1s. And I can carry on and do B flat minor 7 to E7, E flat 7 I should say, E flat minor 7, A flat 7, A flat minor 7, D flat 7, D flat minor 7, G flat 7, so on. Okay, so minorizations are hugely important. Now we also have minorizations in something like the bridge of rhythm changes. When we've got a cycle of fifths, okay, when we've got that cycle of fifths, what's really happening there harmonically is we're having D7 to D minor 7 to G7, to G minor 7 to C7 to C minor 7 to F7 to B flat. The chord you're currently on is becoming minorized. It's becoming the new 2. So D7, D minor 7, G7, G minor 7, C7, C minor 7, F7 to B flat major 7. So you could start on A minor 7. So you could go A minor 7, D7, D minor 7, G7, G minor 7, C7, C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7. Tricky to say it as you play it. Now, voice leading wise, we could make that quite smooth. We could have so all I'm doing is choosing the closest voicing. You need to have your inversions learned to do this successfully, guys. You need to know your inversions really, really well. So a final example of minorization is in Cherokee. So in Cherokee we have, I think it's in B major, the middle section. We have 2, 5, 1, minorization. 2, 5, 1. Minorization, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so what's going on there is C sharp minor 7, F sharp 7, B major 7, B minor 7, E 7, A major 7, A minor 7, D 7, G major 7. Okay, so that's another example of minorization. So you need to be able to go through progressions like that. Maybe instead of starting on that string set, you can start on this string set. So the final question I want to look at here is referring to triad pairs, which is a generic modality compression concept. Now, the question is, what are you thinking about when you play? And this is a very common question that we ask pro guitarists. The Guitar Hour podcast always asks their guests this question. What are you actually thinking about when you play? And the specific question here is, are you thinking notes or are you thinking shapes? Well, I want to come back to what I started this video with, which is that when you're playing live, you should just be playing. You shouldn't be worrying about trying to get through really heavy voice leading concepts. All you should be thinking about when you're playing live is groove and melody. You want to come up with a little counter melody if you're wanting to do something a bit more sophisticated, and just harmonize it as you go along, using shapes that you can do in your sleep. Live is not the time to be practicing these generic modality concepts. When you are in your practice sessions, you can do pen and paper theory, you can find these shapes on the instrument and you can run through them. But I would massively recommend that you try, instead of thinking of triad pairs, just think of a single triad. Choose the triad that you think is the most flavoursome, and whenever you see that chord in a tune, just play loads of simple tunes, ballads, pop songs, and force yourself to use that voicing to replace whatever your current voicing is. You all have experience of this. If you've ever seen a C chord in a song, you've automatically done this. We know that's a C chord. Now, the reason we use that as a C chord is because it's the first one we learned. So whenever you see a C in a chord from now on, you're going to use, I don't know, you maybe like this voicing, which sounds like that. That's a triad voicing from generic modality compression. So you're going to be playing your song, and whenever you see a C, you're going to play that. And you're going to make that your new C chord. When I talked about creating modal harmony, I referred to picking the most flavoursome notes and creating a voicing from those. The problem with that, of course, is if you've already taken the most flavoursome notes out, the ones that we're left with probably aren't that exciting. Now, that's a pro and a con. Now, it's a pro because it means you don't need to worry about those notes too much. And instead of thinking about a triad pair, just pick one triad that you really like. Now, it's also a pro because it means that that second triad is going to be less interesting. Therefore, it's probably relegated to a passing chord. Now, what that means is you don't really need it at first. And as you build confidence with the nice sounding triad, you can start to shove in a few passing triads along the way. So I'd perhaps get comfortable with my inversions of my most flavoursome chord first. I'm going to demonstrate this in B because I can then use my low B string to give context. So if I use that same voicing I just demonstrated but down a semitone. And I'd get comfortable with just using that triad and its inversions. Well, then that leaves me with the notes that are left. Well, in this instance, that would be this pretty tricky voicing here. So I would work on adding that in. Again, not very practical for a live scenario. Great for composing though, and things you can prepare, great for that sort of stuff. That sort of sound, just adding in a simple passing chord as I go. But we know we're going to stick to our most flavoursome sounding triad, which sounds great. And again, that can become a structure for improvising. So I hope you found that useful. I want to just quickly summarize the most important points there, guys, which are the hard work happens in your practice. I'd like to quote Michael Brecker, if I may, who said that it would often take him 6 months before something came out in his live playing. He would practice something, but he'd never force it. And then eventually it would just happen on stage. Now, Michael Brecker is, of course, I can't even think of the right word. A legend doesn't quite cut it. But it took him 6 months for something to come out in his playing. When we work on these concepts, these theories, which is a pen and paper concept, and the locating, actually finding these things on our instrument, we need to be aware that that's not necessarily because we're wanting them to come out in our playing. It's because we're improving our understanding of music. If it comes out in our playing at some point, brilliant. But if it doesn't, so what? The idea is it improves us as a musician. It's got no relation on our live performance. Now, of course, it will eventually come out in your playing. When you are live, you are solely concentrating on groove above all else and melody second. The specific voicing of which chord you play, no one cares. It just gets blended in anyway. All you want to do is focus on your skills that require hardly any brain power so that you can focus 99.9% of your attention, rather than worrying about specific voicings, how much you're locking in. That really is the most important thing. So I hope I've kind of clarified some of the confusion that we had from the first two videos. You will have received a great benefit from the understanding the theory in those videos. So if you went through the theory as a guitarist, good for you. That's really, really important. But to summarize the approach on the instrument, yes, when we're actually playing live, we tend to think more visually rather than thinking specific notes. It's just too much to juggle. So I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks so much for your comments and questions. It's really, really helped me making this video, so thank you. Cheers.